I was rinsing a wine glass at the sink when my phone buzzed across the counter. It was almost 10 at night and I rarely got messages that late. Hannah's name lit up the screen. She had sent me a link to TikTok with no caption, which immediately made me uneasy. I dried my hands quickly and tapped it open. The video filled the screen, filmed from a corner of Canlis, the fine dining landmark overlooking Lake Union. The camera caught a couple bathed in soft golden light. A young woman in a fitted red dress leaned forward, laughing, her hand sliding across the table to touch the man's wrist. He smiled, raised his glass, his profile turning just enough for the world to see his face. My chest tightened. That face was Ethan. My husband of 8 years, vice president of sales at Westlake Financial, the man who had promised me forever under a rain of rose petals in front of family and friends in Portland. There he was, captured in perfect clarity, toasting another woman. I froze, trying to convince myself I was wrong. Maybe it was someone who looked like him. But then the camera angle shifted slightly, and I saw the watch on his wrist. Stainless steel navy bezel, the exact Rolex I had spent months saving for, as an anniversary gift. The same watch he had bragged about to his colleagues. My eyes dropped to his shirt. Pale blue, pressed perfectly the one I had ironed last week. Every detail screamed Ethan, and every second of denial crumbled away. I replayed the clip, heart pounding harder each time. The young woman across from him was Sienna Brooks, his secretary. 28, ambitious, always too polished for an office assistant. I remembered the holiday party 2 years ago, when she had clung a little too close to his side, laughing at his jokes as if she had written the punchlines herself. I had told myself not to be jealous, not to be that kind of wife. Tonight, the internet confirmed I should have trusted my instincts. The phone rang in my hand. "Hannah." I answered, pressing it to my ear with shaking fingers. "Maddie," her voice was careful. "I thought you should see this before it gets bigger. That clip already has 20,000 views, and people are tagging Westlake in the comments. Are you all right?" I sank onto the bar stool, the granite countertop cool under my palm. I could barely breathe. "That's him," I whispered, fighting to keep my voice steady. "That's Ethan." Hannah exhaled heavily. I knew it. I recognized him too. "Maddie. He's dining at Canlis like he's untouchable, like no one would ever notice." Tears stung the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I stared at the frozen frame of the video, Ethan's hand resting over Sienna's, her smile wide enough to split the room in half. I thought of every excuse he had fed me. Late nights at the office, client dinners, business trips that never lined up with his calendar invites. All the times I swallowed the pit in my stomach to keep the peace. Every lie stacked itself neatly into the shape of this betrayal, unfolding under chandeliers and candlelight. I tried to laugh, but it broke halfway into a sob. 8 years. 8 years I gave him everything. Hannah's voice cut through. "Maddie, listen to me. What are you going to do?" I dragged a hand over my face, my reflection in the dark window staring back at me. Behind me hung the framed photo of our wedding, my white dress glowing, Ethan's smile proud. I almost ripped it off the wall, but instead I clenched my fists at my sides. "I do not know yet," I said slowly, "but this is not going to end the way he thinks it will." Silence stretched between us until Hannah finally spoke, low and certain. "Good, because he has no idea who he's dealing with." I ended the call and set the phone down with deliberate care. I walked through the quiet house, past the pictures of vacations and family gatherings, each image mocking me with a version of life that no longer existed. I stopped in front of the mirror by the hallway. My eyes were red, my hair unkempt from the long day, but behind the wreckage, I saw something else. A flicker of steel. The match had already struck, and the fire inside me was catching fast. I sat back down and watched the clip once more. The comments were piling up, strangers guessing who the couple was, speculating about his job, admiring her dress. They didn't know yet, but soon they would. I thought about my parents in Portland, about how often they reminded me that Danny was the golden child, the doctor, the one who brought pride to the family. I thought about Ethan's smirk when he once told me I would never be as successful as my brother. The humiliation pressed down hard, but beneath it something new was rising. I closed the app and set the phone face down. My heart was still pounding, but the tears had dried before they fell. I had seen enough. The betrayal was carved into me now, but so was the determination. And as the house around me stood silent, I already knew I could not carry this secret alone much longer. Some truths demanded action, and the weight of family history was about to come crashing back into my life. Some truths demanded action, and the weight of family history was about to come crashing back into my life. I remembered the first time my father looked at me and said with that clipped professor's tone, "You will always be in Danny's shadow." I was 10, standing in our backyard in Portland, holding a spelling bee trophy, the plastic base still warm from the sun. Danny had just returned from a little league game with a scraped knee, and somehow all of the attention shifted to him. My mother rushed ice to his leg, while my father ruffled his hair, proud of his effort. My trophy, the one I had carried home beaming, was placed on the counter and forgotten by dinner. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my small lavender-painted room and realized that in this house effort only mattered if it came from my brother. That pattern stretched through my adolescence like barbed wire. Straight A's were dismissed as easy for me, while Danny's B in chemistry was celebrated with cake because science was hard, and he had tried his best. I was told to be supportive, to not make him feel small. Even in college, when I landed a coveted internship in New York, my parents sighed on the phone and said, "It is fine, but look at Danny, he is on track for med school." Every success of mine was weighed against his and always found lacking. The memory burned sharper now, because only last month we had all gathered again around the old oak dining table in Portland. Olivia had made her famous roast, and the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room while the candles flickered against the framed family portraits. My father Robert carved the meat with deliberate precision, always the patriarch at the head of the table. Danny sat tall, still wearing his scrubs after a shift at the hospital, as if to remind everyone of his noble sacrifice. His wife Julia smiled politely at his side, glowing with the calm of someone who had never been overlooked. My mother clasped her hands and said proudly, "Danny saved another patient today. The entire hospital staff is saying he is a miracle worker." Robert nodded firmly and added, "He has the Carter discipline. He makes us proud." Then his eyes drifted toward me, and his voice softened with the kind of pity that sliced deeper than anger. "Maddie, marketing is fine, but medicine is real work. Ethan, don't you agree?" I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as every face turned toward my husband. He sat beside me, suit jacket folded neatly over the chair, wineglass balanced between his fingers. He cleared his throat and gave a diplomatic smile, the same one he used in boardrooms. He said nothing, neither defending me nor disagreeing with my father. His silence felt louder than any insult. I pushed food around my plate, listening to their voices swell with praise for Danny, until it became impossible to separate the past from the present. When dessert was served, my father leaned back and gave me that look, the one that had haunted me since childhood, a mix of disappointment and cool authority. "You could do more if you stopped chasing distractions. Look at your brother. He is building a legacy." I held my fork tighter, imagining it bending under my grip. The air in the room seemed to close in the laughter about some surgery story ringing hollow. Ethan caught my eye for a brief second, and then looked away, pretending to listen to Danny. My chest felt hollow, as if every accomplishment of mine had been erased in that moment, leaving only absence. I excused myself and walked to the back porch, the night air cold against my face. From inside, I heard Olivia's voice rise in admiration for Danny's long hours, Robert's laughter booming, Ethan's low hum of agreement. It hit me then with the weight of inevitability. My isolation had not started with Ethan's betrayal in Seattle. It had begun decades earlier in this house, around this very table, where I had been cast as supporting character in my own life story. I leaned against the wooden railing and let the truth sink in. The betrayal I saw on TikTok was not just a husband straying. It was the continuation of being invisible, of being told I was never enough. The ache of that realization was raw, but inside it I felt something shift. A current of defiance surged where the sadness used to pool. I stepped back into the dining room, my eyes locking with my father's. He gave me that cold, measuring stare, as if daring me to contradict him. In that instant, my resolve crystallized. I would not wait for his approval, or Ethan's, or anyone else's. I was done being the quiet daughter, the patient wife. The candles flickered as I sat back down, and my voice in my head was steady and sharp. It is time to claim justice for myself, no matter what it costs. What I did not know yet was how quickly the chance to act would come, and how explosive the fallout would be once I seized it. I barely slept for nights after that dinner in Portland, lying awake in the dark with the glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains of our townhouse in Queen Anne. Every time I closed my eyes, the TikTok video replayed in my mind. Ethan smiling across the table, Sienna leaning in her laughter, tinkling like broken glass in my ears. I tried to bury it with work staying late at the office, but even the numbers on my spreadsheets blurred into the shape of his betrayal. By the fourth night, I stopped fighting the truth. The ache in my chest was not going away until I did something about it. I texted Hannah on Friday morning. "Meet me at Elm Coffee at noon." She replied instantly, "I'll be there." The cafe was busy, filled with students on laptops and professionals taking calls. Hannah sat near the window, her phone already on the table. She slid it toward me. "Maddie, that video now has 500,000 views. People are dissecting every frame, guessing who he is tagging Westlake. It is not slowing down." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug in front of me. "I know. That is why I need to act." She studied me, searching for hesitation, but I had none left. "What are you thinking?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice, though the cafe was loud enough to drown us out. "I am going to send him flowers. At Canlis. Right to his table." Hannah blinked, then slowly grinned. "That is bold." "It is precise," I said. "He thinks he can flaunt her in the open." "Fine. I will use the same stage to remind him exactly who he belongs to." She reached across the table, squeezed my hand. "I am in. Tell me what you need." That evening, I called Claire Miller, an old friend from college who now practiced family law in Seattle. She invited me to her office downtown the next day. The walls were lined with thick casebooks, but her desk was clear except for her laptop and a neat stack of folders. She poured me water and leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp. "So you found proof?" I nodded. "TikTok of all things." She shook her head, half amused, half disgusted. "Men like him always think they are careful until they are not. Listen, Maddie, if you want out, you need more than flowers. If Ethan has been using company funds to wine and dine her, that is financial misconduct. Misuse of funds. The court will not look kindly on it." The words landed like bricks in my stomach. Misuse of funds. It sounded clinical, but behind it was the reality that Ethan had not just betrayed me personally. He had risked our entire financial future to play house with his secretary. Claire slid a yellow legal pad across the desk. "Write down everything you know. Dates of his trips, company cards he used, receipts you can recall. If you can build a trail, I can build a case." I scribbled furiously, memories spilling out faster than my pen could keep up. The late-night Ubers charged to his corporate account, the wine bottles over $300 that showed up on our joint statements, the hotel in Bellevue he claimed was for a client retreat. Claire scanned my notes and nodded. "This is good. Maddie, you can win this." I left her office with the pad pressed against my chest, my heart hammering. For the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tilting, not in his favor, but mine. 2 days later, I stood in the middle of an upscale florist shop in Capitol Hill, the air thick with roses and lilies. A young clerk in a black apron approached. "Can I help you find something special?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I want 24 long-stem red roses, the best you have." She led me to a refrigerated case, pulled out a bundle wrapped in crisp paper. "These are Ecuadorian fresh this morning." "Perfect. I want them arranged and delivered to Canlis tomorrow evening. Table reserved under Ethan Carter." She tapped it into her tablet. "Do you want a card?" My hand tightened around my purse strap. "Yes. I will write it myself." She brought over a small ivory card and a fountain pen. I stood at the counter, the world narrowing to the blank square of paper in front of me. My pulse slowed, my breath steadied. I wrote in careful cursive, "With all my love, your wife." I stared at the words, black ink sinking into the fiber, and a calm fierceness spread through me. For years I had been quiet, the dutiful daughter, the supportive wife swallowing words to keep peace. Now I was speaking without saying a word, and he would have no choice but to listen. I slipped the card back into the envelope, sealed it, and handed it to the clerk. "Please make sure it is delivered directly to his table." She nodded, oblivious to the storm those flowers would unleash. Walking out into the cool Seattle evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. The city buzzed around me, but in my chest burned a steady flame. Ethan thought he controlled the narrative, that I would sit silently in the background as always. Tomorrow he would learn that the story had changed, and I was ready to watch the curtain rise. I arrived early and stood outside beneath the glow of the canopy while the valet whisked away cars one after another. The air carried a breath of the lake and the faintest trace of cedar from the nearby hillside. When my reservation time neared, I walked inside, gave the host my name, and asked for a quiet two-top near the back. I kept my coat on, and my voice even. A piano drifted through the room, a melody smooth enough to make anything seem elegant. The host led me past tables set with white linen and glass polished to a shine, then left me with a leather menu and a view across the main floor. Ethan sat near the window with Sienna. Candlelight painted his cheekbones and turned her dress a deeper red. She angled her phone just so and smiled into the front camera. Her lips formed a silent caption for followers I could not see. He leaned forward, his posture casual and proprietary, the look of a man who believed the world belonged to him. I felt the tremor in my hand fade as a steadier current took over. This was only a stage, and I had chosen my seat in the audience. Hannah texted that she was in a corner booth with a clean sightline. She would film only when it mattered. I slid my phone face down and let the server pour water and describe the specials. I nodded and ordered something simple, because I did not plan to eat more than a bite. What I needed was timing. When the server left, I scanned the room for the florist courier. At the far entrance, a woman in black stepped in, carrying a long white box tied with a satin ribbon. My chest eased. The choreography was in motion. Sienna lifted her glass and tilted her head toward Ethan. Her mouth moved with words I could imagine. "You deserve this. You work so hard." He smirked and touched the rim of her glass with his. The live piano swelled into a familiar standard, and the room became honey and gold. I held my napkin in my lap and breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, the way Claire had taught nervous witnesses. Across the room, the host conferred with the courier. The ribbon was removed, and I caught the first shimmer of red as the roses emerged. The server approached their table with the composure of someone trained to move through luxury without disturbing it. He held the arrangement as if it were a rare instrument. He set it beside Sienna's water and addressed Ethan by name with professional warmth. "Mr. Carter, this is for you." Several heads turned the way people always do when a grand gesture arrives. Sienna's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her chest with theatrical delight. For a fraction of a second, she looked like a girl promised the sun. She lifted the envelope from the flowers and held it with careful fingers. Her nails were the same color as her dress. The room quieted in the way fine rooms do when attention concentrates in one place. She slid the card out. Her lips curved as she prepared to read aloud, confident in the script she believed she had been given. I watched Ethan's face as closely as I watched hers. He leaned back leisurely, as if he already owned the moment. Her voice carried just enough to be heard across the nearest tables. "With all my love, your wife." The last two words did not enter the room so much as land in it. A bead of confusion flickered across her face. She looked at Ethan, then back at the card, then back at him again, the smile breaking as comprehension rose. The sound at other tables thinned to whispers. The pianist hit a hesitant note and recovered. Ethan's expression changed from amusement to calculation. He reached for the card, and Sienna pulled it back, clutching it as if it might burn. Her breath hitched. She asked him something I could not hear. He answered too quickly. She stared at him with a look I had never seen on her face, a look that said the ground she stood on was giving way, and no one had warned her there was a cliff. She lifted her champagne, not in a toast but in a choice, and threw it at him in one fast arc. The glass struck his chest and split. Champagne sprayed across his shirt and lap, then spattered the edge of the tablecloth and the floor. The room exhaled in a collective flinch. The server appeared with practiced speed, offering linen towels, murmuring apologies no one deserved to hear. Ethan sat stunned, droplets catching the light on his jaw. Sienna pushed back her chair. She said something sharp enough to slice, then looked around and realized she was no longer on camera in the way she had planned. She turned her phone face down on the table with a trembling hand. I kept my face neutral and lifted my water to my lips. The roses were impossibly red against the white linen, an emblem laid at the center of a ruined scene. Hannah's phone was angled low at her table. I could feel the pull of the moment through the room, that tide of attention that gathers like a storm when the rules of a place are broken. The host stepped forward, words soothing, gestures small, but the damage had already turned visible. The man at the neighboring table pretended not to watch while he watched. A woman in a navy dress pressed her lips together in a line of sympathy that was not for Ethan. Sienna picked up her clutch and stood. She did not look at the roses again. She walked past the server and the host and the pianist, who began another song as if music could cover what had just happened. Ethan rose more slowly, a hand on the back of his chair, his damp shirt clinging to him, his pupils scanning the room like a man searching for a fire alarm to pull. For a heartbeat, I wondered if he would sense me across the distance, if some electric thread of marriage would snap and direct his gaze to mine. He lifted his hand to call for a manager instead. I lowered my eyes to the menu to give myself the luxury of composure. My pulse thudded, but it no longer hurt. It sounded like a drum for someone marching. I signaled my server, asked for the check, and thanked him with a calm he returned. While I signed, I felt the soft tap of a text on my phone. Hannah had sent a short message. "It is all on video." Her next message arrived before I could slip the phone back into my purse. "The lighting is clean and the audio picked up the card." The camera had caught the exact moment the words, "your wife," left Sienna's lips. Ethan argued with the manager in tight, clipped phrases that carried just enough to be understood. He wanted the mess removed and the attention redirected. He wanted the night to unspool back into what he had planned. The manager nodded and apologized in that way expensive restaurants have perfected over decades of human error. It did not matter. The humiliation had already settled like dust, and everyone could see it. I stood and shrugged into my coat. The server held my chair and thanked me for dining with them. My knees felt steady. Walking past Ethan's table, I kept my gaze on the exit, but I let my eyes flick once to the roses. The card sat open on the linen, 4 small words written in my hand that had changed the temperature of the room. Sienna was gone. Ethan stared at the flowers as if they were a riddle he could not solve. For the first time since the night I watched that TikTok, I felt something like relief. Outside, the valet stand glowed under a bank of warm lights. The city air tasted different, the lake sending a chill up the hill. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Hannah again. "The file is uploading. I can push it when you say go." I closed my eyes and pictured the ripple moving outward from a white card in a red bouquet to the feed on 1,000 screens. I did not need to answer her yet. I wanted the night to breathe, to etch itself into memory exactly as it was. Cars slid up to the curb, and guests laughed in little huddles, unaware of the scene they had missed by minutes. I stepped back under the canopy and watched my breath fog in the light. In my mind, I could already see the caption and the hashtag that would follow, and I knew that what had happened at a single table would not stay in that room for long. By the time I got home that night, Hannah had already uploaded the video. Her captions were merciless and perfect. A 30-second clip, shaky but clear enough, showing Sienna opening the card and reading those words out loud, then the champagne glass shattering across the floor. Hannah had added one line across the screen: "When karma shows up wearing red roses." The hashtag, "your wife," pulsed at the bottom. I tried to sleep, but the buzz of notifications from my phone kept the apartment glowing in the dark. By 2 in the morning, the clip had crossed 100,000 views. Strangers commented like they had all been sitting at the next table. By dawn, it had jumped to 500,000, and my city felt smaller, like everyone in Seattle had suddenly been invited into my private disaster. Hannah called at 7, her voice vibrating with disbelief. "Maddie, you're trending. People are stitching the video with their own stories about cheaters." Some influencer with 2 million followers just used the hashtag. By the time I opened my laptop, 3 different local news sites had reposted it. Headlines screamed about the mysterious bouquet that ruined a high-end dinner. The comments under each article were brutal, but not for me. They were brutal for Ethan. At 9, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. His voice came out like a snarl. "You think this is funny? Do you understand what you've done? You will pay for humiliating me." I held the phone away from my ear, then brought it back slowly. "Funny," I said. "No. But satisfying." "Yes." Before he could say another word, I ended the call. Silence never felt so good. An hour later, my inbox chimed. A subject line glared back at me, "Immediate board meeting request." It was from the executive committee of Westlake Financial. They were summoning Ethan to explain the scandal. Attached was a screenshot of the trending video. Someone on the board had already seen it, and they were not amused. I poured myself coffee and watched the ripples spread across the internet. By noon, national gossip accounts had picked it up. By evening, late-night hosts were making jokes about corporate guys who confused secretary dinners with secret rendezvous. The humiliation wasn't mine anymore. It was his. Hannah texted me a link to a TikTok where a user had slowed down the video to highlight the exact moment Ethan's face went white as Sienna read the card. The comments filled with laughing emojis and sentences like, "This needs to be in a museum." Another showed side-by-side stills of Ethan's corporate headshot against his stunned face in the restaurant. The caption read, "Spot the difference." Answer 1 still had dignity. As the chaos built, my phone rang again. Not Ethan this time. It was Claire Miller, the divorce attorney I had met with. She didn't waste time with greetings. "Maddie, you need to get ahead of this. File now before his team spins it. The board will want distance, and you can use this moment to strengthen your case." I agreed. The timing was brutal, but perfect. I opened the folder she had prepared for me, full of notes about misuse of company funds, expenses, funneled into dinners and hotels for Sienna. Suddenly, those receipts weren't just numbers on a page. They were headlines waiting to happen. By the time night fell, I knew 2 things with certainty. 1, Ethan's carefully curated image of the polished family man was cracking everywhere people looked. 2, the crack had my fingerprints on it. Mini-climax came at 11 p.m. when another email appeared in my inbox. This one wasn't from Ethan or from the board. It was from a journalist at the Seattle Times requesting a comment for a feature story they were preparing about the viral clip. The headline in the draft read, "The Your Wife moment that Seattle can't stop talking about." And just like that, I realized the fallout had only begun, and the next stage wouldn't be contained online. It would spill into Ethan's career, his reputation, and the empire he thought could never be touched. The following Monday, the board of Westlake Financial called an emergency meeting, and Ethan was summoned into the glass tower downtown, with cameras already waiting outside. The lobby where I had once stood during holiday parties now buzzed with reporters holding microphones. I watched the live feed on my laptop, Ethan pushing through in a tailored suit that looked less crisp under the flashbulbs. His jaw was tight, his tie crooked, his hand shielding his face, as if that could block the avalanche. By noon, the news broke that a $5 million partnership deal with a tech client in Bellevue had been canceled. The client released a statement about integrity and public image, the words that made executives shudder. Westlake announced that Ethan Carter was suspended pending internal investigation. His title, once polished on business cards, was suddenly framed with doubt. I closed the laptop and sat back, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in my kitchen. For years I had watched him walk into rooms with the confidence of a man certain he could never fall. Now he was stumbling in front of the city, and I did not lift a finger. That evening my phone lit up with a call from Portland. My mother Olivia's voice came through high and frantic. "Maddie, what have you done?" Everyone at church is whispering. The neighbors called me this morning. They said they saw the video on Facebook. Do you understand how humiliating this is for the family? I let her words wash over me like cold rain. For once I did not shrink. I did not apologize. He humiliated himself, Mom. Not me. There was a pause, the kind where silence carries accusation. Then my father Robert's voice came on stern and clipped. "Your stunt has destroyed Ethan's career. Whatever problems you had, you should have handled them privately. This kind of spectacle stains our name." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "Our name? You care more about what the neighbors think than what your daughter endured. Ethan cheated. He used company money to fund his affair. And you are worried about gossip." Robert bristled, his tone colder. "That is not proven." I felt my chest rise as I steadied my voice. "I have the receipts. Hotels, dinners, all paid from corporate accounts. Do you really think Westlake suspended him for nothing?" The line went quiet until Danny's voice entered the smooth authority of the golden child. "Maddie, you are making us all look bad. This kind of vindictiveness only confirms what people already thought. That you are jealous that you cannot stand my success or Ethan's." My hands clenched the phone, but my words came clear. "No, Danny. What makes us all look bad is a husband who betrays his vows and steals from his company to impress his mistress. What makes us look bad is a family that defends him instead of me." The silence after that was longer, heavier. I could almost hear my mother's breath falter. Finally, Olivia spoke, but softer now. "Is that true? Did he really use company money?" "Yes, Mom. And it is all documented. That is why he is suspended. That is why the deal collapsed. This is not about me ruining anything. This is about him destroying himself." There was no quick reply, no lecture, no scolding. Only the faint sound of her swallowing, as if the weight of years of denial had just settled in her throat. I ended the call and set the phone down, my pulse still racing. For once their judgment had not crushed me. I had pushed back, and the truth had landed. The picture-perfect pedestal they had built around Danny and Ethan now had cracks, and I had forced them to look at them. Later that night, I stood by the window watching the city lights scatter across the lake. Behind me the apartment was quiet, but inside my head, the noise of years of belittlement began to fade. I was not just Ethan's discarded wife, or Robert and Olivia's overlooked daughter. I was the woman who had finally stood tall in the storm. And as I stared at the reflection of my own eyes in the glass, I knew the fight was far from over. The board might suspend Ethan, my parents might be stunned into silence, but the real battle was only just beginning, and it would be fought in court. The morning after the call with my parents, I walked into Claire Miller's office downtown, carrying a folder so heavy with receipts and credit card statements, it felt like I was hauling years of betrayal in my arms. She stood when I entered, her dark blazer, crisp against the cream walls, her eyes sharper than any scalpel. "Sit down, Maddie. Today we file." She opened the folder and spread the evidence across her desk. Restaurant bills with tips that could cover my rent, hotel stays in Bellevue and Tacoma, car services billed to Westlake's corporate account. Every line item painted the same picture. Ethan had built his affair with company money, and now the foundation was crumbling. Claire tapped the papers. "This is more than enough. We will petition the court for divorce and submit these expenses as supporting evidence. He cannot argue against his own statements." We walked together to the family court in Seattle, a gray stone building that suddenly felt like the center of my universe. Inside, the air was hushed but tense, the sound of heels echoing on polished floors. Claire handed over the petition to the clerk, and within minutes it was stamped and entered into the system. Judge Elaine Thompson, known for her no-nonsense rulings, was assigned. 58, with silver hair pinned into a bun and glasses perched low on her nose, she looked like someone who had seen every kind of family war and lost patience with excuses. Claire presented our motion to freeze the joint accounts until the divorce was resolved. The judge skimmed the documents, lifted her eyes to me, then back to Claire. "Based on what I see here, I am granting the motion. Mr. Carter will not be able to move funds until further notice. Her gavel hit the block softly, but to me it sounded like thunder rolling through years of silence. By afternoon, Ethan's texts were flooding my phone. "Please, Maddie, let's talk. This is getting out of hand. We can settle this between us." I ignored the first three, but the fourth came with a phone call I couldn't resist answering. His voice was no longer the booming executive, but strained and desperate. "Maddie, we can work this out. Just withdraw the petition. Think of the years we had." The words made me laugh, bitter and cold. Years where I kept quiet while you lied. Years where you spent money that wasn't yours. I am not that wife anymore, Ethan. I am not silent. He went quiet, breathing heavy on the other end. "You will regret this." "No," I said, and ended the call. The next morning, the news broke that Sienna had been fired. Her name was scrubbed from Westlake's website, her LinkedIn stripped bare. Her TikTok, once filled with curated clips of luxury dinners and new handbags, was drowning in comments calling her a thief, a homewrecker, a fraud. I watched one of her videos where she smiled into the camera and twirled a glass of wine. The comments below were merciless. "Does your boss still buy that for you? Hope you saved your receipts." Ethan's own fall came swiftly. The board released a statement that he had been terminated from his position as vice president of sales. They confirmed an internal audit was underway, and if funds had been misused, they would pursue legal action. Overnight, his professional empire collapsed. His name was trending on LinkedIn for all the wrong reasons, articles circulating with headlines about greed and arrogance. I sat with Hannah in her apartment as she scrolled through the chaos, her laughter sharp. He always thought he was untouchable. Look at him now. But beneath the satisfaction was a steady seriousness. Claire called again, her voice brisk. "The judge has fast-tracked your case. With evidence this strong, the court wants it resolved quickly. We could have a preliminary hearing within weeks." I felt the air shift inside me, a mixture of fear and relief. Years of humiliation were collapsing into days of reckoning. For the first time, the scales tilted my way, and no one could pretend not to see it. As I stood at my window that night, the skyline of Seattle glittered across the dark water. The city felt alive with whispers of my story, and I knew the fight was far from over. The court would deliver its judgment, but the deeper question loomed. What would be left of me and of him when the gavel finally came down? The court would deliver its judgment, but the deeper question loomed. What would be left of me and of him when the gavel finally came down? Weeks later, I stood in the hushed chamber of the family court in Seattle, papers spread before me on the polished wooden table. Judge Elaine Thompson read through the agreement, her glasses perched low, her tone firm. The petition for divorce was granted. The joint accounts remained frozen until division, and my portion of the marital assets was set at $2.4 million. The gavel struck once, and just like that, 8 years of marriage ended with a sound that echoed louder than vows ever had. I signed my name slowly, letting each letter settle into the page, as if sealing not just a document, but a chapter of my life. Across from me, Ethan stared down, shoulders slumped in a suit that no longer looked like armor. He did not glance at me when the bailiff collected the papers. The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was hollow, emptied of everything that once bound us. Outside the courthouse, Claire clasped my shoulder. "Congratulations, Maddie. You walked through fire and came out holding water." Her smile was sharp with pride. Hannah was waiting on the steps, her phone buzzing in her pocket. She hugged me tight. "The clip has crossed 10 million views," she whispered into my ear. "The whole country knows. Women are posting their own stories under the hashtag. They are thanking you." I could hardly process it, the idea that my pain had transformed into something larger, a mirror for strangers. That night I sat in my empty living room, boxes stacked against the walls, and scrolled through video after video. Women in their kitchens, in their cars, in their bedrooms, each sharing stories of betrayal. The caption beneath them read, "Your wife." Some cried, some laughed. All of them spoke with a kind of defiance I recognized in myself. I closed my phone and walked to the window. The city stretched beneath me, neon signs blinking against the rain-slick streets. Tomorrow, the movers would bring my things to a new condo near Pike Place, 2 bedrooms with tall windows and a balcony overlooking the bay. I had chosen it myself, bought with my share of the settlement, no one else's permission required. On Sunday afternoon, I carried the last box into that new space. The air smelled of fresh paint and salt water drifting off the Sound. I placed a vase of lilies on the counter, poured coffee into a clean white mug, and stepped onto the balcony. The breeze lifted my hair, the late light dancing across the water. In my ears was no longer the echo of betrayal, but the quiet rhythm of freedom. I reached into a small velvet pouch and pulled out the diamond earrings I had bought with my own money. Not a gift, not an apology, not a bribe. They glinted in the sunlight as I slid them into my ears. The weight was light, but the meaning was heavy. They were mine, and so was the woman wearing them. I sipped slowly and let the warmth spread. Revenge was not only about the spectacle of humiliation. It was about the quiet after, when the noise faded, and you were left standing taller than before. Revenge was about reclaiming your voice after years of silence. It was about justice, not the kind handed down by a judge, but the kind that rises when you finally believe in your own worth. The lake shimmered in the distance, ferries cutting across the water like white lines drawn on blue glass. I smiled a real smile that reached my eyes and felt peace for the first time in years. The past was finished. The future was wide open. Revenge was never just about him. It was about finding myself again, and I had. If you have ever carried the weight of betrayal and found the strength to rise, tell your story. Justice never goes out of style.